The rosy picture I've painted for America in the 1950s is largely that for white Americans. But it wasn't that way for everyone. More specifically, African Americans. Black people had long suffered not just since the days of slavery, but the Reconstruction era and post slavery. They still experienced a significant amount of disenfranchisement and segregation. Plessy versus Ferguson, decades beforehand, established the idea of separate but equal amenities for white people and black people. So, from that standpoint, you could have segregation as long as they had equal amenities. But we really know in Plessy versus Ferguson, separate was not always equal. So, yeah, you're going to have your segregation. Here's your restaurant for colored people. Here's your restaurant for white people. Here's your fountain for white people. Here's your fountain for black people. The white fountain's going to work and be in perfect order. It's going to crank out nice cold water. The black one is barely going to work and it's going to be broken and it's going to be poor in quality. That sort of a thing was very prevalent in the 1950s. And it was a backdrop to all these good feelings America had about our place in the world, economic growth, suburban growth, our competition in the Cold War, our space race, music. There's a whole segment of our population that didn't really feel any of the positive effects. And as you have droves of white people leaving the cities to go to the suburbs, you have a significant increase in the numbers of black people moving from the south to northern cities like Chicago, Detroit, New York, even out west towards Los Angeles, and that sort. So you have about 3 million black people that moved to cities in a 20-year span from World War II to 1960. And they basically fill the void that white people had left behind because they went out to the suburbs. So now you're going to have, because of discrimination and other different things that play that adversely affect black people, you're going to have large pockets of black people in urban environments. They're going to be more destitute and otherwise poor. You're going to have higher crime rates. You're going to have higher poverty rates, and you're going to have other things that negatively affect black society and Hispanics coming from Mexico and Puerto Rico and places like that that have a negative effect on inner cities. So you also have farmers that see a reduction of income because of farming technological input. You have people coming out from poor farms, poor white people moving to cities and moving to other urban environments to escape the doldrums of the farm. The inner cities are changing. They're turning over. And so neighborhoods are starting to look different and they're going to have a different bent on them from societal and economic factors. Otherwise, though, still prevalent in the 1950s was the idea of segregation. That begins to be challenged in 1954 when Oliver Brown submits um, a suitcase, or rather a lawsuit, if you will, um, that eventually makes its way to the Supreme Court, known as Brown versus Board of Education. In Topeka, Kansas, Oliver Brown used to scoff at the notion at how his daughter would have to be bused from their location to the black school across town, whereas just literally a couple blocks away, there was a perfectly good school for students her age, but for white students. Why couldn't his daughter go to that school that's in his neighborhood? It's for her age. And the idea of Plessy versus Ferguson would continually be thrown in his face. Well, the black kids have got to go to that school. Sorry, you're going to go to that school across town. It just didn't make sense. Not only is it wrong to discriminate, but it also logistically, it just doesn't make sense. He filed a suit that eventually would make it to the Supreme Court. And it partially, in a unanimous vote, by the way, 9-0, the Supreme Court justices all agreed that Brown versus Board of Education definitely should go to the plaintiff Brown because it is, in fact, discrimination when you're separating, but that is not an equal circumstance. And what that did was it set off a chain reaction of now integrating black students into otherwise white schools. So over the course of the next few years, as a result of Brown versus Board of Education, now you're going to see an integration, leading to a lot of strife, especially in the South. One of the most famous integration efforts was at Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, where in September of 1957, 9 black students were to be enrolled in classes at Central High. Except on the day they were supposed to do so, white students protested and barricaded and formed a barrier to prevent them from actually entering into the school. Eventually, the National Guard would have to be called and would have to escort them onto and into the premises. It would be those types of fights and the courageous people that would endure the threats, the language, the physical barriers, and otherwise that would overcome stereotypes and discrimination. That's true bravery right there. To be able to hold your notebooks, go into a school where you are not wanted, you are not welcome. You have a legal right to be there, but you are not welcome. That's courage. Okay, so from that standpoint, you start to see an integration of schools all throughout the South that see a lot of pushback and people forming even political action groups. White groups that basically say they don't want to be integrated with black students. It's good the way it is. It's a good order. It's not the way it's supposed to be. But otherwise, that was a sign of normality at the time. But to coincide with that, you had other folks who took brave stances to begin the idea of civil rights coming into true fruition. Rosa Parks has gained a lot of positive attention for her 1955 action in Montgomery, Alabama, where she entered into a public bus and, as deemed necessary of the segregation at the time, black people were supposed to go to the back of the bus. She sat in the front of the bus where white businessmen were deemed to sit, and she refused to move from her spot. Now, growing up, I always thought that all the cool people were in the back of the bus. That's where all the cool people wanted to go. So it's like, cool people are in the back of the bus, so why do you want to sit in the front? I didn't always kind of grasp that when I was a young kid. But otherwise, though, Rosa Parks' defiance and her peaceful protest sparked ideas and gained influence for other people to do the same. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would begin taking action around this time so as to raise the idea of peaceful protest in civil rights movements all throughout the South. So you have various different legal decisions going around this time that are impacting segregation, that are impacting integration, and are making waves in civil rights movements that will really take hold in the next decade. Some of your greatest civil rights leaders get their start in this era in the 1950s, and rightly so. So from that standpoint, we move on.